The massive ships appeared at the edge of the solar system like dark clouds blocking out the stars. Admiral Sarah stood on the bridge of Earth's defense station, watching the sensor readings with growing concern. The alien fleet was enormous. Hundreds of ships, each one larger than anything humans had ever built. "How many?" she asked her tactical officer. "We count at least 300 vessels, Admiral. The largest ones are over 10 kilometers long." Sarah felt her stomach drop. Earth's entire defense fleet had maybe 50 ships, and none of them were even half that size. She had been preparing for this day for years, ever since the first reports came in about the Empire. But seeing their actual fleet made her realize how outmatched humanity really was. The aliens had been expanding across the galaxy for centuries. They conquered world after world, adding each new species to their empire as slaves. 47 different alien races now served under their rule, and now they had come for Earth. "Admiral, we're receiving a transmission," the communications officer announced. "It's coming from the largest ship in their fleet." "Put it on screen." The flickered and showed something that made Sarah's blood run cold. The alien leader was massive, standing nearly 3 meters tall. His skin was dark purple and covered in scales that gleamed like metal. 4 arms extended from his torso, each ending in clawed hands. But it was his eyes that truly terrified her. They were completely black, with no visible pupils, and they seemed to look right through her. "I am king of the Empire," the alien spoke in perfect English. His voice was deep and rumbling like distant thunder. "I have ruled for over 1,000 years. I have conquered 47 species. Your pathetic race will be the 48th. Sarah forced herself to stand straight and meet those terrible eyes. "This is Admiral Sarah of the Earth Defense Force. You are not welcome in our space." The alien king made a sound that might have been laughter. "Your space? You have existed in space for less than 300 of your years. We have ruled the galaxy since before your species learned to use fire. You call yourselves humans, yes. Such a young and foolish race." "State your business here," Sarah demanded, though she already knew what he would say. "Business?" 4 hands gestured dismissively. "I do not conduct business with cattle. I give orders. You will surrender your worlds to the Empire. Your people will serve us as slaves just like all the others. You have 72 of your hours to decide." "And if we refuse?" The alien king's expression grew even colder. "Then we will burn every world you have claimed. We will destroy your cities and kill your people. We will hunt down every human ship until none remain. Your species will become extinct, and the galaxy will forget you ever existed." Sarah felt the eyes of her bridge crew on her. She knew they were all thinking the same thing. The alien fleet was massive. Earth's colonies were spread across only 12 star systems. They had no real military to speak of, just patrol ships and cargo vessels. How could they possibly fight something like this? "I need time to consult with my government," Sarah said. "You have 72 hours, repeated. "When that time ends, you will broadcast your surrender on all frequencies. You will order your ships to stand down and your colonies to prepare for occupation. If you do not, we will show you why 47 species chose slavery over extinction." The transmission ended, leaving the bridge in stunned silence. Sarah looked around at her crew. They were good people, trained professionals, but she could see the fear in their eyes, and she couldn't blame them. She felt the same fear herself. "Get me a direct line to Earth Command," she ordered. "Priority 1 encryption." Within minutes, she was connected to General Martinez, head of Earth's Global Defense Council. His weathered face appeared on her personal screen, and she could tell he had already heard about the alien fleet. "How bad is it, Sarah?" he asked without preamble. "Worse than we planned for," she admitted. "They have hundreds of ships. Each one could probably destroy our entire fleet single-handedly. They're giving us 3 days to surrender." General Martinez was quiet for a long moment. Sarah could see him thinking, weighing their options. Finally, he spoke. What do you think we should do? It was the question Sarah had been dreading. As a military officer, her job was to protect Earth and her colonies. But how could she protect them from something like this? The smart choice, the logical choice, would be to surrender, save as many lives as possible, accept slavery instead of extinction. But something inside her rebelled against that idea. Humans had fought for their freedom before. They had faced impossible odds and somehow found a way to win. Could they do it again? I think, Sarah said slowly, that we need to send them a message. What kind of message? Sarah thought about her daughter back on Earth. She thought about all the human colonies, all the people who were counting on her to keep them safe. She thought about the 47 species that had chosen slavery over death, and she wondered if any of them regretted that choice. The kind of message that tells them exactly what we think of their ultimatum, she said. General Martinez smiled grimly. Draft it and send it. I'll back you up with the council. Sarah turned back to her communications officer. Open a channel to the alien fleet, all frequencies. Channel open, Admiral. Sarah took a deep breath and looked directly at the camera. She knew the alien king would be watching. She knew he expected her to beg, to plead for mercy, to accept his terms like all the others had. Instead, she spoke two words that would echo across the galaxy for years to come. Come try. The transmission ended, and Sarah felt a strange calm settle over her. She had just declared war on an empire that had conquered half the galaxy. It was probably the last decision she would ever make as a living being, but somehow it felt like the right one. Around her, the bridge crew began preparing for battle. They all knew they were probably going to die, but they also knew they were going to die as free humans, not as slaves. And sometimes that made all the difference. The attack began exactly 72 hours after the ultimatum ended. The fleet moved with terrible efficiency, their dark ships spreading across human space like a plague. The first target was New Singapore, a mining colony on the outer rim with only 50,000 people. Captain Maria Santos watched helplessly from her patrol ship as the alien vessels approached the planet. Her small craft was designed for police work, not war. Its weapons could barely scratch the paint on a cargo hauler, let alone damage one of those massive alien warships. Captain, we're receiving distress calls from the surface, her communications officer reported. The aliens are demanding immediate surrender. Maria knew what she should do. Any reasonable captain would retreat, preserve her ship and crew for a more winnable fight. But she couldn't just watch as an entire colony was enslaved. All ships, this is Captain Santos. Form up on my position. We're going in. Ma'am, we only have 6 ships, her tactical officer protested. They have 30. Then we better make this count, Maria replied grimly. The human ships charged forward, their small weapons firing desperately at the alien fleet. For a few precious moments, it looked like they might actually accomplish something. Their missiles struck the alien shields, creating brilliant flashes of light. Then they fired back. The alien weapons were unlike anything humans had ever seen. Beams of pure energy that cut through human ships like they were made of paper. Maria watched in horror as her entire squadron was destroyed in less than 30 seconds. Only her ship survived, and only because she had been at the rear of the formation. Captain, they're targeting us, someone screamed. Maria felt her ship shake as the alien weapons found their mark. Alarms blared throughout the bridge as systems failed one by one. She had maybe seconds before her ship exploded. Abandon ship, all hands abandon ship. She barely made it to an escape pod before her patrol craft became a cloud of burning debris. As her pod drifted away from the battle, she watched the aliens continue their assault on New Singapore. The planet's defense platforms lasted less than 5 minutes. Then the bombardment began. The news reached Earth within hours. New Singapore had fallen. The entire population had been taken prisoner and loaded onto alien transport ships. The planet itself was left a burning ruin, its cities reduced to molten glass by alien weapons. General Martinez sat in the war room beneath Earth Command, staring at the reports flooding in from across human space. Every colony was under attack. Every defense had failed. In just one day, the aliens had captured or destroyed half of humanity's presence in space. "What about our fleet?" he asked Admiral, who had managed to evacuate her command station before it was destroyed. "Gone," Sarah replied flatly. "They took out our main battle groups in the first 6 hours. We have maybe 20 ships left, scattered across 3 systems. And the colonies is under siege. They're holding out, but not for long. New Tokyo fell this morning. Paradise Lost went dark 12 hours ago." Martinez felt the weight of command crushing down on him. Millions of humans were dead or enslaved, and the war had barely begun. Every report brought news of fresh disasters. The aliens seemed unstoppable. "Sir," one of his aides interrupted, "we're receiving a transmission from the fleet. It's King." Martinez almost laughed. The alien king probably wanted to gloat, to offer another chance for surrender now that humanity had seen what his empire could do. Well, let him try. "Put him through." The alien king appeared on the main screen, looking exactly as arrogant as before. Behind him, Martinez could see displays showing burning human worlds. "General Martinez," said, somehow knowing exactly who he was talking to, "I trust you have seen what happens to those who defy the Empire. Your outer colonies have fallen. Your fleets are destroyed. Are you ready to be reasonable?" "I'm ready for you to go to hell," Martinez replied. The alien king's expression didn't change. "Very well. Since you insist on learning the hard way, I will provide additional lessons. Watch your news feeds, General. See what defiance costs." The transmission ended, and within minutes, the reports began coming in. The aliens weren't just conquering human colonies anymore. They were making examples of them. Entire cities were being destroyed for the crime of resisting. Prisoners were being executed in public broadcasts meant to terrify the remaining human worlds. "They're trying to break our will," Sarah observed. "Make us so afraid that we'll surrender rather than watch more people die." "Is it working?" Martinez asked quietly. Sarah was about to answer when another aide burst into the room. "Sir, we're getting reports from the commercial shipping lanes. Something strange is happening." "Strange how?" "Freighter crews are reporting ghost contacts. Ships appearing on sensors where nothing should be, then vanishing before anyone can get a lock on them." Martinez frowned. "Sensor malfunctions." "That's what we thought at first, but it's happening across multiple systems, always in areas where the alien fleet has been operating." Sarah suddenly looked interested. "Are these our ships or alien ships?" "Unknown, ma'am. The contacts never stay on screen long enough for proper identification, but they're moving in patterns that don't match any known flight paths." Martinez felt a small spark of hope. During the months before the invasion, he had authorized several black projects, experimental programs that were so classified that even he didn't know all the details. Could one of them be responsible for these mysterious contacts? "Keep monitoring those reports," he ordered. "I want to know everything about these ghost ships." Meanwhile, on the other side of the galaxy, something very interesting was happening aboard a cruiser. Lieutenant Commander Jake crouched in the darkness of an air vent, his breathing mask covering his mouth and nose. Around him, the alien ship hummed with strange energy that made his teeth ache. Jake was part of a program that officially didn't exist. For the past year, the best Special Forces soldiers in the Earth military had been training for exactly this kind of mission. They had learned to survive in space without suits for short periods. They had studied alien technology and physiology. They had practiced moving through environments designed for non-human species. Now it was time to put that training to use. Jake reached the junction he had been looking for and began setting charges on the power conduits that ran through this section of the ship. The aliens never bothered to guard areas like this because they considered them impossible for enemies to reach. After all, what species would be crazy enough to board enemy ships while floating through space? Humans, apparently. Jake finished his work and began crawling back toward his extraction point. In 12 hours, his charges would detonate, taking out the ship's main power grid and leaving it helpless. And this was just one ship. Across the fleet, dozens of human infiltrators were carrying out similar missions. The aliens thought they had won because they had superior technology and overwhelming numbers. They were about to learn that humans had something even more valuable. They were about to learn what desperation could accomplish. 3 weeks after the first attacks, the fleet finally turned toward Earth. King stood on his command bridge, watching the blue planet grow larger on his screens. Behind him stretched the largest invasion force in the Empire's history. Over 400 ships, carrying enough firepower to turn entire worlds into dust. The humans have gathered their remaining forces near the gas giant, his tactical officer reported. Intelligence estimates approximately 200 vessels. Studied the readings with interest. 200 ships was more than his scouts had reported humanity possessing, but it still seemed pathetically small compared to his fleet. Perhaps the humans had been building ships in secret, or maybe they had recalled every cargo hauler and mining vessel to join their desperate last stand. "Any attempt to contact us?" he asked. "None, my king. They appear to be preparing for battle." Felt a moment of what might have been respect for the doomed species. They knew they were going to die, but they were still willing to fight. It was more courage than most species showed when facing the Empire. "Signal the fleet," he commanded. "All ships advance. Show them the price of defying the Empire." The Armada moved forward like a living thing, their dark ships blotting out the stars. As they approached Jupiter's orbit, they could see the human fleet waiting for them. The ships were arranged in a rough defensive formation, clearly hopping to make their enemies pay for every inch of space. Admiral Sarah stood on the bridge of the UES Defiance, one of the few Earth battleships to survive the outer system battles. Around her, the crew worked with grim determination, checking weapons and preparing for what they all knew would be their final fight. "Alien fleet is in range," her tactical officer announced. "They're maintaining formation, no sign of break-off." Sarah nodded. Everything was proceeding according to plan. The aliens saw exactly what they expected to see, a desperate human defense, and outnumbered making a hopeless last stand to protect their. What they didn't see was the real plan. "All ships, this is Admiral," she broadcast on the command frequency. "Remember, we need to sell this. Make it look good, but keep your escape routes open." The first exchange of fire lit up the space between Jupiter and its moons. Human missiles streaked toward the alien fleet while energy beams lanced back in response. The battle looked exactly like every other encounter in the war. Humans fighting bravely, but losing ground against superior technology. Watched the engagement with satisfaction. His ships were taking minimal damage while the human fleet was being systematically destroyed. Within a few hours, the last organized resistance to his rule would be eliminated. "My king," his communications officer said suddenly, "we're receiving reports from across the fleet. Multiple ships are reporting system failures." "What kind of failures?" "Power grid shutdowns, engine malfunctions, weapons systems going offline. The affected vessels are requesting permission to withdraw for repairs." Frowned. Battle damage was normal, but his ships had barely been scratched by the primitive human weapons. "How many ships are affected?" 37 so far, my king, but the number is increasing." That got attention. 37 ships represented nearly 10% of his fleet. Even accounting for human desperation, that level of malfunction was unacceptable. Have our engineers investigate immediately. I want to know what's causing these failures." The answer came faster than he expected, and it was not what he wanted to hear. "My king," his chief engineer reported via emergency communication, "we've found the source of the malfunctions. The ships weren't damaged in battle. They've been sabotaged from within." "Impossible," snarled. "Our ships are sealed environments. No enemy could board them undetected." "The sabotage devices were placed weeks ago," the engineer continued. "Small charges set on critical systems, timed to detonate during the final assault. We're finding them throughout the affected vessels." Felt the first stirring of real concern. "How many more ships are compromised?" "Unknown, my king. We're beginning immediate inspections of the entire fleet." As if summoned by his words, more reports began flooding in. Ship after ship reported critical system failures. Engines died. Weapons went offline. Life support systems began failing on vessels that had been perfectly functional moments before. Captain Torres floated in the darkness between two cruisers, her suit's thrusters keeping her positioned exactly where she needed to be. She had been waiting in this spot for 6 hours, ever since her infiltration team had finished planting charges throughout the alien vessel beside her. Through her helmet's visor, she could see the explosions beginning to bloom across the enemy fleet. Tiny flowers of light marked the destruction of critical systems that had taken her teams weeks to sabotage. The aliens were just now discovering what humans had been doing while they conquered the outer colonies. "Phase 1 complete," she reported into her comm unit. "All primary targets have been neutralized, beginning Phase 2. Phase 2 was even more ambitious. While the aliens dealt with their sabotaged ships, human strike teams would begin boarding operations on the undamaged vessels. The confusion and panic would provide perfect cover for the next stage of the plan. Torres activated her suit's stealth systems and began moving toward her next target. Behind her, the fleet was falling into chaos as more ships suffered mysterious failures. On his command bridge, King watched his perfect invasion crumble before his eyes. In less than an hour, over half his fleet had been crippled by sabotage. The ships were still functional as spacecraft, but their weapons and engines were offline. They were sitting ducks in space. "How is this possible?" he demanded of his officers. "How did the humans manage to infiltrate our ships?" "We're still investigating, my king," his intelligence chief replied nervously. "But preliminary reports suggest they used the ventilation systems and maintenance tunnels, areas we considered impossible for biological entities to navigate." "And you were wrong," said coldly. "Yes, my king." For the first time in his 1,000-year reign, felt something he had almost forgotten: uncertainty. The humans had somehow turned his greatest advantage against him. His massive fleet, which should have been unstoppable, was now vulnerable and scattered. "Signal the undamaged ships," he ordered. "We're withdrawing to a safe distance to regroup." But even as the orders went out, more explosions lit up the darkness. Human ships that had seemed crippled suddenly came back to life, their engines flaring as they moved to attack the disorganized alien fleet. What had thought was a desperate last stand revealed itself as an elaborate trap. The humans hadn't been trying to win the battle. They had been trying to lure the entire fleet into range of their sabotage teams, and it had worked perfectly. Admiral watched the alien retreat with grim satisfaction. The first phase of humanity's real plan was complete. The Empire had just learned that technological superiority meant nothing if your enemy was willing to do things you considered impossible. "Signal all ships," she commanded. "Begin pursuit, don't let them regroup." The hunter had become the hunted, and the real war was just beginning. Retreat quickly became something far worse than King had ever imagined. What should have been an orderly withdrawal to regroup and repair became a nightmare of constant harassment and impossible attacks. The humans were everywhere. Strike teams appeared inside ships that should have been secure. Supply convoys vanished between star systems. Communication relays went dark across the Empire's territory. It was as if humanity had declared war not just on the fleet, but on the very concept of safe space. Commander clutched his weapon as he led a patrol through the corridors of his own ship. 3 days ago, his cruiser had been part of the mighty fleet advancing on Earth. Now, he was hunting human infiltrators who seemed able to appear and disappear at will. "Contact ahead," one of his soldiers whispered, pointing down a dimly lit corridor. Raised his energy rifle and advanced carefully. The humans had already killed 12 of his crew members, always striking from the shadows before vanishing back into the ship's ventilation systems. How they had even gotten aboard was still a mystery. A sound behind him made spin around, but there was nothing there. When he turned back, one of his soldiers was gone, simply gone as if he had never existed. "Where is Al?" demanded of the remaining patrol members. They looked around in confusion. The soldier had been right beside them a moment ago. Now there was only empty corridor and the distant hum of the ship's engines. Then the lights went out. In the darkness, heard sounds that would haunt his dreams for the rest of his life. Brief, violent struggles, energy weapons firing, his soldiers screaming, and through it all, something moving with deadly purpose in the black. When emergency lighting finally activated, found himself alone in the corridor. His entire patrol had vanished. Only he remained, standing in a pool of green blood that had belonged to his squad. On the wall beside him, someone had written a message in script: "Your empire ends here." Similar scenes were playing out across the entire alien fleet. The humans had somehow infiltrated dozens of ships, and they were waging a campaign of terror that was destroying morale faster than any conventional weapon could have. But the infiltrators were just the beginning. As the alien fleet tried to retreat toward their home systems, they discovered that their supply lines had been completely severed. Fuel depots that had operated safely for decades were now smoking ruins. Repair stations had been captured or destroyed. Even their communication networks were failing as human strike teams systematically eliminated relay stations across 12 star systems. General Martinez stood in the newly constructed command center on Earth's moon, watching status reports flow in from across human space. For the first time since the war began, the news was good. "Strike Team Alpha has captured the main supply depot at Station," Colonel Washington reported. "They're estimating enough fuel and ammunition to supply the alien fleet for 6 months." "Excellent. What about Team Beta?" "They've successfully eliminated the command post at. The entire sector is now cut off from Central Command." Martinez smiled grimly. The plan was working even better than they had hoped. While the aliens had been focused on their overwhelming technological advantages, humans had been preparing for a very different kind of war. "Any word from our ground forces?" he asked. "The liberation of New Singapore is proceeding ahead of schedule," Washington replied. "The colonists are reporting that the alien garrison surrendered after being exposed to Agent 7. Agent 7 was one of humanity's nastier surprises. A biological weapon specifically designed to target physiology, it caused severe neurological disruption without being lethal. Affected aliens became disoriented and unable to coordinate their actions, making them easy targets for human forces. The beauty of Agent 7 was that it was completely harmless to humans and the other alien species enslaved by the Empire. Only were affected, making it the perfect liberation tool. "How many colonies have we freed so far?" Martinez asked. 17, sir, and the numbers are accelerating as word spreads. Many garrisons are surrendering without a fight once they see what happened to their colleagues. Martinez nodded with satisfaction. The psychological warfare was working. They had ruled through fear and superior technology for 1,000 years. Now they were discovering what it felt like to be on the receiving end of both. But the most devastating blow was yet to come. King sat alone in his command chamber, staring at reports that seemed to make no sense. In less than 2 weeks, his mighty empire had collapsed. 47 star systems that had been firmly under control were now in open rebellion. The species he had enslaved for centuries were rising up, inspired by humanity's example. "My king," his aide announced nervously, "we have a priority communication from the—" They were one of the first species the empire had conquered. For 800 years, they had served as loyal slaves. Now their representative appeared on screen with something the king had never seen before: defiance. "Your Majesty," they said with obvious sarcasm, "I bring greetings from the newly formed Alliance of Free Worlds. We are formally declaring our independence from your empire." Felt his rage building. "You dare rebel against us? Have you forgotten what happens to those who defy the empire?" "We have not forgotten," the alien replied calmly. "But we have also seen what happened to your fleet at Earth. We have watched your forces flee from a species you claimed was primitive. If humans can defeat you, then so can we." The transmission ended, leaving staring at a blank screen. Around him, his command staff waited nervously for orders that might never come. The truth was becoming undeniable. The empire, which had stood for over a millennium, was crumbling, not because of superior technology or overwhelming force, but because one species had refused to accept defeat. "My king," his intelligence chief approached cautiously, "we have located the human command center. It appears to be on their moon." "Can we strike it?" asked desperately. "Our long-range weapons are still functional. We could launch an attack, but—" The officer hesitated. "But what?" "But our projections indicate that even if we succeed in destroying their command center, it will not end their resistance. The humans have proven they can operate independently. Destroying their leadership might actually make them more dangerous, not less." Closed his eyes and tried to think. How had it come to this? How had a species he had dismissed as primitive brought down an empire that had conquered half the galaxy? The answer came to him slowly, like a terrible revelation. They had conquered through superior technology and overwhelming force. They had never faced an enemy that was willing to sacrifice everything for victory. They had never encountered a species that treated the impossible as merely difficult. Humans, he was beginning to understand, were not like other species. They did not accept defeat gracefully. They did not submit to superior force. When pushed to the edge of extinction, they became something terrifying. They became desperate. And desperate humans, as the galaxy was learning, were the most dangerous creatures in the universe. The war was far from over, but the outcome was no longer in doubt. The question was not whether humanity would win, but whether the empire would survive the experience of losing. The end came not with a massive battle, but with a quiet knock on the door of King's private chambers. The ruler sat alone in his command ship, surrounded by the wreckage of his 1,000-year empire. Most of his fleet had either been destroyed or captured. His home worlds were in open rebellion. The species he had enslaved for centuries were hunting down his remaining forces with weapons provided by humanity. For 3 days, no one had answered his calls. His own officers had abandoned their posts, fleeing in whatever ships they could find. The mighty empire that had once spanned 12 star systems was now reduced to a single vessel drifting in the darkness between the stars. When the knocking came, almost ignored it. What was the point? But something about the steady, patient rhythm made him look up from his despair. "Enter," he called, expecting to see one of his few remaining loyal servants. Instead, the door opened to reveal a human woman in a simple military uniform. She was not particularly large or threatening. She carried no visible weapons. Behind her stood 2 other humans, equally unremarkable in appearance. Admiral Sarah stepped into the chamber and looked around at the alien king, who had once terrorized the galaxy. He seemed smaller somehow, diminished by defeat and isolation. "Your Majesty," she said politely, "I am Admiral of the Terran Commonwealth Navy. I believe we met at the beginning of this conflict." Stared at her in disbelief. "How did you get aboard my ship, my security systems?" "We're designed by a species that never learned to think like humans," Sarah replied. "We have been aboard your vessel for 6 hours. Your entire crew surrendered without firing a shot." The alien king felt the last of his hope drain away. Even his personal guard, the elite soldiers who had sworn to die before allowing harm to come to him, had abandoned their posts. "Have you come to execute me?" he asked wearily. Sarah seemed genuinely surprised by the question. "Execute you? No, Your Majesty. We have something much more educational in mind." What followed was unlike anything in the recorded history of galactic warfare. Instead of killing the defeated tyrant, the humans had decided to make him into a symbol. They stripped him of his royal armor and ceremonial weapons. They bound his 4 arms with simple metal chains. Then they began a journey that would take them to every world the Empire had ever conquered. The first stop was Andromeda Prime, home world of the species that had been the Empire's first conquest 8 centuries ago. When the human transport landed in the capital city, millions lined the streets to see something they had never imagined possible. King, the immortal god ruler who had once commanded them to build monuments to his glory, was led through those same streets in chains. He walked slowly, his head down, flanked by human guards who seemed almost casual in their vigilance. The crowds were silent at first, unable to believe what they were seeing. Then someone began to laugh. The sound spread through the gathered masses like wildfire, growing into a roar of joy and vindication that could be heard across the entire city. For 800 years, these people had lived in fear of this creature. They had been forced to worship him as a living god. Now they saw him as he truly was, just another mortal being made vulnerable by defeat. The scene was repeated on world after world. On where the Empire had conducted its most brutal experiments on sentient beings. On New, where entire populations had been enslaved to work in the Empire's weapon factories. On each world, the formerly enslaved populations gathered to witness the humiliation of their former oppressor. Dr. Elizabeth Harper, the human assigned to study the effects of the punishment, walked beside the procession as they made their way through the capital of Tau. Around them, the liberated population celebrated with a joy that was almost physical in its intensity. "Fascinating," she murmured into her recording device. "The psychological impact of seeing their oppressor reduced to this state appears to be far more healing than simple execution would have been. They're not just witnessing his defeat, they're seeing proof that no power is absolute." The journey took 6 months. Every former subject world of the Empire requested a visit from the fallen king. Some wanted justice for specific crimes. Others simply needed to see with their own eyes that their nightmare was truly over. Himself changed during those months. The arrogant ruler who had demanded humanity's surrender slowly became something else. He was forced to see the consequences of his actions in a way he never had before. The suffering he had caused was no longer abstract. It was written on the faces of every person who lined the streets to watch him pass. On the world of Sigma Draconis, an elderly alien approached the human guards and asked permission to speak to the former king. The guards, following their orders to allow such interactions, nodded their consent. The old alien, a member of a species whose name the Empire had tried to erase from history, looked up with eyes that had seen too much suffering. "Do you remember me?" the alien asked in a voice barely above a whisper. Looked down at the creature and felt something he had not experienced in centuries. Shame. He did remember. This being had been part of a delegation that had come to plead for their world's independence, only to be imprisoned and tortured as an example to others. "I remember," said quietly. My children died in your labor camps, the old alien continued. My mate was executed for trying to preserve our cultural archives. My entire civilization was reduced to slavery so that your empire could grow stronger. Expected the creature